everyone. Good evening. My name is Mo Qasim. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We should be starting soon, in about a few minutes, going live on Facebook. In the meanwhile, we should be enjoying some traditional Arabic music. Hello. Thank you all for joining us. Like I said earlier, my name is Mo Qasim. I'm a Palestinian and an activist here in the city of Toronto. Um, Before we get started today, I would just like to briefly mention that we are situated on Indigenous lands and Indigenous territories here on Turtle Island, and that we should always keep that in memory and act in accordance with the liberation of Indigenous peoples everywhere. Um, in addition, while we are here today, we should keep in mind our brothers and sisters, our families in the homeland, whom are fighting on a daily basis for their survival, particularly the people of Gaza, who are under a brutal siege, an inhumane siege. Our refugees, whom are scattered across the earth, who continue to suffer on a daily basis, and our prisoners. Um, we are delighted to be joined by a lot of you folks and members, leaders, and elders of the Palestinian community and the allied communities from more than 9 major cities across Canada. Uh, as we've mentioned earlier, we should be live on Facebook right now. Uh, so without further introduction, uh, our event today is a town hall with Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri is a distinguished lawyer, he's a journalist and an activist. He has stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people and our struggle for a long time. He has lent us support in grassroots actions and he has lent us legal representation for our movement. Words cannot do justice to describe the integrity and commitment of Dimitri Lascaris to human rights and social justice. Before we start with the town hall, I would like to thank the organizations that have contributed to this town hall, particularly the main organization, the Canadian Palestinian Organizations Coalition, and Campuses for Palestine, which is the informal network of Palestine Solidarity student clubs across Canada, or Turtle Island. And I will now pass it on to Musa Zaidan to speak briefly about the CPO, or Canadian Palestinian Organizations.
Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Muhammad, for the introduction, and I thank everyone who's attending today with us, the town hall with Dimitri Lascaris. I'm here representing, I'm the coordinator of the coalition of the Canadian Palestinian organizations from coast to coast. We have all the main and most active and vibrant organizations across Canada, starting from Halifax, St. John, London, Ontario, Hamilton, Mississauga, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. We have all those organizations across the board are with us and endorsing Mr. Lascaris on his race, and also never forget the energy and the engine actually of the work, the youth. We have also SPHR McGill. We have Palestinian Student Association of Ottawa University. We have Carleton, we have York. As Muhammad mentioned, we have the BDS network, Toronto BDS network. Am I missing anyone? Someone else, Muhammad, Ala? I don't have all the names
we have Actions for Palestine.
Actions for Palestine, Campuses for Palestine, of course.
We have the Canada Palestine Association in Vancouver.
And Canada Palestine Association in Vancouver. We have the Canadian Arab Forum of British Columbia. We have the Palestinian Association Winnipeg, Ramzi Zaid, he's on with us. We have the Palestinian Association of Edmonton, CPFQ, Canadian Palestinian Foundation of Quebec. We have APAC, the Association of Palestinian Arab Canadians of Capital Region. We have Palestine House of Toronto, Palestine House of Mississauga. We have the APA, the Arab Palestinian Association, Hamilton Palestinian Association. We have the Palestinian Association of London, Ontario, and the Arab Society of London, Ontario. Hopefully I'm not missing anyone else, but I thank each and everyone. This is the coalition, and the coalition is established back in 2018. Working on having a unified voice for the Palestinian community across the board, working with our youth. So usually we used to say our youth in Toronto, our youth in Ottawa, our youth in Edmonton. Now we say our youth in Canada. So basically it's the youth force of our community across Canada all together working as a one unity as well. The coalition run few projects here and there to support the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian Canadian community in Canada. The latest we've done is we ran the medical relief campaign. We raised over $170,000 to help the hospitals in Palestine to go through the pandemic. So that was the last project we've done, and the project that we are working on right now is basically with the Green Party and Lascaris, Mr. Lascaris. I'll turn it back to Mo Al-Qasim, our moderator for the night. Muhammad.
Thank you, Musa. So just very briefly about today's program. We have already introduced Mr. Lascaris. We will go through a brief series of questions with Mr. Lascaris, and then we will open up the virtual floor for you to ask your questions. We would prefer, though, if you keep the questions in relation to Palestine and Mr. Lascaris' relationship to Palestine and Palestinian activism. After that, we will have a brief presentation regarding the Green Party and how you can help Dimitri's campaign. So without further ado, Dimitri, how are you doing?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself, but I had someone else had to unmute me. First of all, let me just acknowledge at the outset, I'm here in Old Montreal, and I'm on the unceded land of the Ganingahaga Nation. And their struggle, the struggle of all Indigenous peoples in this country and elsewhere, is in essence the Palestinian struggle. That's why I know the Palestinian people stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples here, and so many of our Indigenous brothers and sisters in this place stand with the Palestinian people. Secondly, please don't call me Mr. Lascaris, because it makes me feel old. So please call me Dimitri.
No worries, Dimitri, I got you.
You and I know each other well. I appreciate the courtesy, and but really Dimitri's fine. I'm impressed by just quickly surveying, who's on the call. I'm impressed by, the diversity of so many people from so many different backgrounds and organizations on this call. And we are all united in our commitment to justice and peace and rights of the oppressed. That's why fundamentally, I think we're all here together tonight, because we have that in our hearts and our souls and our minds. And I have been privileged in my life to know many of you. I hope that I get to know those of you who I haven't gotten to know very well. But I know that fundamentally, the mere fact that you're on this call and you're participating in this conversation means that you have a profound commitment to human rights and peace and justice, because ultimately that's what this call is about. I know that we are going to be talking about my campaign to be leader of the Green Party of Canada, but it's not the fact that I'm going to occupy that role that matters. What matters is that the cause of justice be pursued with unerring vigor and passion and a complete unwavering commitment to principle. That's what matters, and that's why I think everybody who's come to my campaign, is working on my campaign, is sacrificing their precious time and energy, and I'm very moved by it. But I don't think it's about me. It shouldn't be about me. It should be about the cause of justice ultimately. And so I want to thank every single person, not only who came on this call, but particularly the people who've put in the amazing time and energy to make it happen. I imagine that bringing all of these organizations together was no easy task, and it seems like we got a pretty good turnout. So my deepest appreciation to the organizers putting this together. And with that, I'll throw it over to whoever's moderating, and I understand you have some questions you'd like to ask, and I look forward to the conversation.
Okay, so back to me, Dimitri. The very first question, simple enough. How did your interest in Palestinian human rights start?
So I'll try to make it brief, but it's a long story. When I was a young man, I was very much influenced in my thinking about Israel and Palestine. I mean, the Palestinian people, to be perfectly candid about you, were not even on my radar. I knew a lot about Israel. And the narrative that you hear about Israel and have been hearing about Israel for decades was one that I embraced as a young man. I remember when I was in high school, I watched this, there was this mini series called Masada about the fortress that the IDF uses to sort of induct soldiers into the army. I was so moved by this that I wrote a poem about it when I was in high school. I still have that poem to this very day. So that's where I came from in sort of intellectually, was embracing the narrative of Israel and not really being even conscious of the suffering of the Palestinian people as a young man. And that began to change when I was 22, when I dropped out of university with some foolish idea in my head that I was going to become a writer, and I took off to Europe and the Middle East by myself. And I ended up for no particular reason. I think I just wanted to see the country. I took a plane from Latanika in Cyprus to Tel Aviv, and I got off the airport at Ben Gurion. And at least at that point in time, what they were doing at the airport was they were taking people out of the plane, putting them on the tarmac, emptying the luggage, and going. And I don't know if this was just for our plane or it was a general practice, but we had to go up and claim our luggage. So I went up and I claimed my knapsack, which was lying on the tarmac, and I was immediately taken aside by a security official and put into the back of the van. And in the back of the van, there was nothing but a table, a little round table that was, I'll never forget this, was bolted to the floor, and there was a light bulb overhead, and there were 2 chairs bolted to the floor. And they locked the van with me and the security official. And I'm just like 21 years old. I can't imagine what's going on. And he begins to interrogate me. And I look back in the day, even to this day, I could easily be mistaken for somebody who's Arabic. And I think that may have had something to do with it. And he didn't believe a word I said. And he kept asking me and over again, why would somebody, he asked me if I'm Jewish. I said, no. He said, do you have family here? I said, no. I can't understand why a young man like you would come to Israel by himself. And he didn't like my answer. And so he took me into the back of the airport. And for the first time in my life, I was strip searched and, mocked and humiliated. And they took apart everything that was in my knapsack. And I was like astonished by this. And I couldn't understand why this had happened, especially because I actually had positive feelings about Israel and was very happy to be there. And then I ended up staying in a hostel in East Jerusalem, simply because it was the lowest cost hostel that I could find. And one day I decided I wanted to go to Hebron to see the tombs of the patriarchs. And I got onto a bus with Palestinian workers to enter. I didn't want to go on a tourist bus for some reason. I just got on the bus with Palestinian workers. And I ended up in Hebron, and I didn't know this, but there was a curfew in Hebron at that moment. And so as soon as we got off the bus, everybody dispersed. All the Palestinian workers dispersed. They immediately went home, and I was left standing alone in the streets by myself. And I was looking for the tombs of the patriarchs, and I walked up to a checkpoint, and an Israeli soldier pointed an assault rifle at my head. Again, this was astonishing to me. I couldn't understand why he would do that to me. And so I left Israel on that trip. There were many other things that happened on that trip and what I saw on the West Bank. Asking questions, I started to wonder about really what was going on there. And fast forward to 2016, I went to Israel to do some legal work because some Eritrean refugees who had been employed as slave laborers at a Canadian gold mine in Eritrea had ended up in Tel Aviv, and I needed to go to Tel Aviv to interview them and gather their evidence. And after spending a week there, I was invited to go to the West Bank by Rahab Nazal, a Palestinian Canadian artist who a few months earlier had been shot by an Israeli sniper for the crime of photographing an Israeli skunk truck in Bethlehem. And I learned from Rahab that after she had been shot by the sniper, when a Palestinian ambulance showed up, the IDF rained tear gas down on the ambulance to try to impede her medical treatment, which is, by the way, a war crime. Impeding both the shooting of a civilian and impeding the medical treatment of that civilian are war crimes. And Rahab said, I want you to come to the West Bank. See, I'll take you to the scene of my shooting, but then I want to take you around and just show you things. And I spent a few days with her going from villages near Bethlehem all the way to Hebron. And, one of the most moving experiences, one of the most heartbreaking experiences I've ever had, she took me to a farm on the outskirts of Bethlehem, which was, it had been in the family of a Palestinian gentleman, a very dignified, soft-spoken gentleman for generations. And it reminded me very much of my own, the country where my parents came from, Greece, and there were these old ancient olive trees in it and fig trees and lemon trees. And when I walked up to this orchard with Rahab and the farmer, I saw this wall, this big gray monstrous wall coming down a hill. And you could see that it was gradually being constructed so that it would completely envelop his orchard. And he took us into the orchard and he said, within 2 months, that closure that we just walked through to enter my orchard will be closed. And I will be forever cut off from the family, from the land of my forefathers. And when they do that, they will break my connection to the land and they will break my soul. So when I returned from that trip, I was the justice critic in the shadow cabinet of the Green Party at that time. And I was so troubled by what I had seen that I decided that I had to do something. At that point, I think it's fair to say I was completely unknown to the Palestinian solidarity movement in this country. I didn't know any of you. I don't think any of you knew me. I was just a class actions lawyer who had an interest in human rights and curious about the Palestinian cause, but I had seen what I had seen, and I had to bring forward this resolution calling for the party to support the BDS movement. It, to me, became a matter of conscience. When I came home, I was so troubled by what I saw that I had difficulty for some time sleeping, actually. You know, and the thought that really burned me was that my government, that purports to speak in my name, was supporting this profound and deeply unjust oppression that I had witnessed with my own eyes for the first time. And when I brought forward that resolution, I learned from the leader of the Green Party, Elizabeth May, who in many ways is very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, that she was not prepared to support the BDS movement, and she simply wasn't going to do that. And so I expected that we would lose, frankly, when I brought forward that resolution. But I thought that at least I could draw attention to the plight of the Palestinian people by causing a debate to happen within our party. And then something amazing happened. All sorts of people, some of whom are on this call, just started coming together to support the passage of this motion. You know, so for example, people from Independent Jewish Voices, from Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, from the BDS coalition, they began to support us, began to you know, advocate on behalf of the resolution, explain to Green Party members what the Palestinian people were going through. And when we got to the convention in August of 2016, 6 months after I had gone to the West Bank and had been shown these injustices by Rahab Nazal, over the objections of the leader, and to my amazement, to my utter amazement, the resolution passed. And at that point, I suddenly became known to the Palestinian solidarity movement. And again, without any expectation on my part that that was going to happen. And then people began to come to me and started asking me for help because I was a lawyer. And they knew that I had had some success in the legal profession. And I had to make a choice, you know, in the latter part of 2016 about what I was going to do. Was I going to step back from the Palestinian cause and go back to the life that I had had? Or was I now going to try to build upon this collective success that we had all achieved? Because it was a collective success. I could never have done that without help from, you know, hundreds of activists and humanitarians around the country. And I decided that I would try to build upon that success rather than step back and allow others to try to build upon it without my assistance. And since then we have, and you know, we can get into that some more, but that's how I got to where I am today. It certainly wasn't planned, and a lot of things in life aren't, but I have not regretted a single moment of it, even in my most difficult periods when I've had to, you know, deal with some very harsh commentary from advocates for Israel. I've never wavered in my belief that this was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dimitri. You've actually, while answering that, you've spilled over into the second question, which was asking directly about the BDS resolution and the response of the Green Party establishment at the time. But there's an additional elaboration that we'd like from you. The UN Resolution 2334, which condemns the settlements that Israel is building and identifies them as illegal. However, Canada's stance on the settlements and on BDS at large has been very negative and upsetting in that regard. So would you be able to elaborate on that particular UN resolution and on the Canadian government's stand?
Well, you know, nothing, I think, demonstrates the hypocrisy of the Canadian government more than a comparison of its attitude towards Israel to its attitude towards Russia and the whole question of Crimea. And, you know, Resolution 2334 is simply an expression of the foundational legal principle or prohibition against the acquisition of territory by conquest. And really, it's so important to understand that the reason why we have this principle, this prohibition against acquiring territory by conquest, is because of the horrors of the Second World War and the First World War. the international community came together after the two most cataclysmic and painful wars in human history and said, we have to absolutely and utterly prohibit under all circumstances using force to acquire territory. And that became the bedrock of international law. And what Israel is doing is thumbing its nose and running roughshod over that basic prohibition upon which the international legal architecture is built. And it's been doing that with complete impunity for years. So why do I mention Russia? Because several years ago, as many of you will know, there was a coup in the Ukraine, and a pro-Russian government was supplanted by a pro-Western government in that coup. And the Crimean people, many of whom were predominantly Russian speakers who felt a strong attachment to Russia, became alarmed by this. And so there was a referendum held in Crimea. And in that referendum, over 80% of the people voted in the referendum, and over 90% said that they wanted to merge with the Russian Federation. And there was indeed a merger in Crimea, which historically had actually been part of Russia for a good while, became part of Russia again. So Canada reacted to this with sanctions on Russia and said that this was an illegal annexation of territory by force, even though there hadn't actually been, in any meaningful sense of the word, a conquest of Crimea, and there had been a referendum. Let's contrast that to what Canada has done with respect to Palestinian territory. In the 1980s, Israel annexed East Jerusalem. The Canadian government admits, and it's admitted for decades, that the annexation of East Jerusalem is a violation of international law. And since then, of course, since 1967, there's been ever expanding settlements in the West. And now there's even no pretense of a peace process. Netanyahu is openly talking about annexing large swaths of the West Bank, the little territory that remains to the people of Palestine. How is the Canadian government reacting to that? Is it imposing sanctions? No, it is actually deepening trade relationships with Israel, and going even worse, even further, it's conferring upon products that are coming out of the settlements preferential tariff treatment, and allowing the makers of those products to label their products as product of Israel when they're sold here in Canada. And Dr. David Kattenberg, who is on this call, is a client and a dear friend of mine. He pointed out the hypocrisy of this to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and the CFIA quite properly said, you know, these labels are illegal. This is not Israeli territory. These labels are false and misleading and deceptive. And the Trudeau government reacted how? It pressured the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, into reversing itself. And David and I have had to go to court, and we have actually prevailed before Madam Justice McTavish, who said that, yes, indeed, those labels are false, misleading, and deceptive. And she specifically, it was a very simple decision I think she had to make. She looked at Canadian foreign policy and said, well, you yourselves in the government are saying that this is not Israeli territory, it's Palestinian territory, occupied territory. How can you say that these labels are accurate? So this is the deep-seated hypocrisy that we see in Western policy towards Israel. Resolution 2334 is another expression of that hypocrisy, because even though it is a correct statement of international law, it has not been enforced by any of the states from the West that signed on to that resolution, and many did. No one vetoed the resolution. No one voted against the resolution. Even the United States abstained. But not one of them has actually taken concrete steps to enforce the resolution.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. So the next question is, if elected into the Green Party's leadership, if you take on that role, how can you ensure that the base of the party is also aligned with your vision of human rights and your vision regarding Palestine?
Well, I think I don't need to do any work in that regard, because the base of the party has demonstrated its alignment with the principle of justice for the Palestinian people and for all indigenous peoples. And how do I know this? Because after this resolution was passed, again, a substantial majority voted for the BDS resolution. There was an internal struggle within the Green Party in late 2016, and there was a lot of negotiation, there was a lot of advocacy, a lot of hard feeling. And out of that emerged a resolution which didn't use the acronym BDS, but it was even stronger in many ways than the one we had adopted a convention, including calling for Israel to respect the right of return of Palestinian refugees, which is a very, very important demand of the BDS movement. But the resolution that I put forward said nothing about that. It was completely silent about it. So when this went to a vote, over 90% of the members of the party ratified it, over 90%. So I don't think, and then there was a poll done, subsequently, which was co-sponsored by CJPME and IJV and me and Murray Dobbin, and it showed huge support in the Green Party for the use of sanctions to bring to an end the oppression of the Palestinian people. So I don't think I have any work to do, frankly, to persuade the base of the Green Party to continue to support this resolution. In fact, I think you probably find a higher level of support in this party than any other party in parliament, with the possible exception of the NDP. The problem with the NDP, of course, is that their leader is quite willing to throw the Palestinian people under the bus and has done so repeatedly.
Thank you so much. So the next question is, the current Canadian foreign policy around Palestine calls for direct negotiations between Palestinians and Israel in order to work towards a two-state solution. Israel's unilateral threats of annexing parts of the West Bank and its constant violations of international law by building settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem hinder that. Canada's current foreign policy is harming Palestinians by supporting the status quo. What will you do as the leader of the Green Party to stop Canada's complicity regarding Israel's international war crimes and taking into consideration the sensitivity of time that the Palestinians have?
I'm going to do what the policy of the party calls for. I mean, the policy we adopted at the end of 2016 says we're going to, we as a party support an arms embargo on Israel. We in the party support a ban on the importation of settlement products, not just that they be labeled accurately, but that they actually be prohibited from entering the country. We as a party support the International Criminal Court prioritizing an investigation into Israeli war crimes. I'm going to do exactly what the policy of the party says. Now, there is a prior policy which talks about the two-state solution, which I personally have come to believe is now completely unrealistic because of the extent of the settlements. And so that may be a discussion that, we're going to have at some stage, about whether there's any real prospect of that. But really, what matters to me is that we have a policy in place which was supported with overwhelming consensus among the members that Israel must be held accountable through peaceful economic sanctions. And that will remain my position, and that's what I'm going to advocate for. And nobody else in parliament is doing that. There's no, the NDP isn't doing that. The Liberals, certainly not the Conservatives, the Bloc, even the Bloc never uses the S word when it talks about Israel, never talks about sanctions. So we need to have simply in our party, somebody who's standing in parliament and defending the party's policy.
So very recently, as I'm pretty sure you've heard, Gaza's only electricity power plant has been shut down. People in Gaza are currently living off of 3 hours of electricity. There is a humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, and Israel is blocking essential goods such as medicine from going into the Gaza Strip. What are the efforts that the Canadian government can do to immediately support the people of Gaza?
Well, the Canadian government can certainly offer very considerable humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. But in order to deliver the aid to the people of Gaza, the Israeli authorities or the Egyptian authorities or both are going to have to cooperate. So otherwise, there's no way to actually deliver the aid. But that should be a priority of our foreign aid program, because the people of Gaza are experiencing a level of suffering that is unparalleled in almost any part of the world. I mean, it has the highest unemployment rate in the world. It has, quite apart from the problems you've mentioned with energy supply, 90% of the water in Gaza is contaminated. It has very, very high levels. The population suffering from very high levels of depression, trauma. The medical system is virtually in a state of collapse. It's amazing that it's held together at all. So this is one of the worst afflicted human rights zones and humanitarian crisis zones in the world. So this should be an area that is receiving dramatic aid from the Canadian government, and we have to use, every tool at our disposal to ensure that that aid gets delivered to the people of Gaza.
Mhm. So the next question and the last one, which hits a bit close to home, because I think, Dimitri, this is where our relationship grew closer. So Zionist groups in Canada and the United States have been targeting Palestinian students and activists with intimidation, lawsuits, and in some cases, doxing. What will you do to support free speech on campuses, particularly speech advocating for human rights, if elected as the leader of the Green Party?
Well, I'm going to advocate against, I'm going to condemn any resolution in Parliament or the provincial legislatures which tries to demonize the BDS movement. We, as many people, virtually everybody on this call is going to know, various governmental agencies have tried to vilify BDS. There was a motion in Parliament which was supported by almost all the Liberals and every Conservative. Basically, it didn't go so far as to call the BDS movement as anti-Semitic, but it came very close and condemned it. And then there was another one in the Ontario legislature. So if I were the leader of the Green Party, I would vigorously oppose any such resolution and argue, without any hesitation whatsoever, that the BDS movement is actually a peaceful movement for justice and peace, and that it deserves the support of the Canadian people. Because ultimately this is a question of accountability, and BDS is simply a non-violent method of ensuring the accountability of a human rights violator. So I think that would be a big first step. If there were any attempts within our government to use litigation as a tool to silence Palestinian advocates, I would certainly condemn that. I would oppose it. And I can assure you that if I ever became the Prime Minister of the country, the Department of Justice and its various resources would never be employed to silence Palestinian activists, whether on campus or otherwise. That simply wouldn't happen in the government that I would be the leader of.
Okay, so basically that concludes the questions that we've had set up. As for now, the questions that are coming from the attendees will have to be sent directly to me over the chat. I will also have to remind folks that I will try my best to keep in mind gender parity. So I will prioritize women or women identifying individuals and their questions. So please send your questions privately to me over chat.
Mo, if you allow me, while you're getting some of the questions, we'll just take give a minute for each of the organizations representative. If they have anything to say to Dimitri, we'll give them a few seconds for each one, if possible. If you allow me, Mo, of course.
You're allowed. Go for it. Thank you, Musa.
Thank you. No, not a problem. While we're getting the questions, if there's anyone would like to give to send out or to ask Dimitri a question, can send the question directly to Mo Qasim on the chat, and he'll address your question. We'll start with let's start with Halifax and John. We have, I guess, Mariam, if you can unmute yourself, Mariam, and introduce, if you have any word like to say to Dimitri from Halifax. Is it Mariam? Mariam Nasser? Okay.
Miriam
Okay.
can't on.
Hi.
Oh,
Hi.
hey.
Hello. Good evening, everybody. Sorry, I could not
Hi.
unmute myself earlier.
Not a problem.
First of all,
Mariam, you're with us from Nova Scotia, I believe, right?
actually from St. John, New Brunswick, your
John,
neighbor.
New Brunswick. Here you go.
Hi.
Go ahead. We'll give you a few seconds with if you want to talk to Dimitri on behalf
Sure.
on behalf of the Palestinian Society of Atlantic Canada, I guess.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you, Dimitri, for the amazing introduction. I honestly did not know about your story in Palestine and your experience as a Palestinian myself, who's never been to Palestine. I can totally understand as a person from the outside, just hearing those stories, let alone living it or experiencing at least one bit of it. So I really, really admire the fact that this story, you didn't just take this story and put it in the back of your head. You actually took it and you acted on it, and you're trying to do your best to make our voices be heard, even in a foreign country like Canada, very far away from Palestine, but the matter still matters. Because in Canada, we were built on immigration, like you said, we can't ignore what Canada did to the Indigenous people. Yet we can use it as a lesson and not repeat the same mistake over and over and over again. We can't just look back. In Canada alone, there are so many Palestinians just like me who never even had a sense of home. And it's not fair to me, it's not fair to my kids, it's not fair to my parents, it's not fair to any human to go through a journey not knowing what a sense of home feels like, and to be forbidden from going there. So I really appreciate all that you're doing, and I hope that no matter what, no matter how many conflicts you run into, no matter how many people who try to shut you down or to make you forget about the cause, or how many troubles it causes you, and I do apologize for that, I hope that you keep going.
Thank you very much.
That's my piece on it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mariam. And we have also Jamal Khalid from APA, the Association of Palestinian Arab. Jamal, are you there? Jamal Khalid. Okay, yeah. We'll move. Khalid, Jamal, تفضل.
Good evening for everybody. I know that the experience that Dimitri he was in when he goes to the Palestine, same thing that it happened to us every time that we go. The humiliation, it's every day. But of course, we understand we have to resist, and we have to go and visit our land. And even though that Canadian passport or any other Canadian will not protect you, even the embassy can't really help a lot, because those really regulation there, it's really doesn't allow anybody to help. They have some rules, and they are, of course, humiliate anybody. But at least now, for the time being, you have all our support, Dimitri. And what we can do every day, we will do it to support you, and hopefully that you get the nomination and you will succeed to the leadership.
Thank you, brother. And I haven't said it yet. I'm going to say it very clearly. The best thing you can do to support me and the cause of justice in our party, if you believe in the campaign that I put in forward, whether and not just with respect to Palestinian rights, but our campaign is about justice ultimately for all. It's about justice for all, for Indigenous people, for people who are homeless, for people who are poor in this country, for people who are victims of U.S. hegemonic foreign policy around the world, wherever they may be. And there are so many of them, countless victims of Western imperialism. That's what this campaign is about. It's about justice. And if you have friends who are motivated by that, who are inspired by that, please have them join the party. If you're not a member, please join the party. ask other people who are interested to find other people to join the party. This is a moment where really a movement needs to come together and say that we want a party in parliament that is going to advocate on behalf of oppressed people everywhere in this country, outside this country, whoever they may be, and there are no exceptions for anybody, whether they're deemed to be a friend of the United States or an ally of the United States or an enemy of the United States. All human rights abusers will be treated equally. All victims are equal. Human rights are universal. That's what this campaign is about more than anything else. And we need the support of all of our allies to come into this campaign and make sure their voices are heard by joining the party. And you can do that by September 3rd. But after that, if you join the party after that date, you would not be eligible to vote.
Thank you, Dimitri. So we've collected some questions, but before we get to the questions that have come from some of you folks, I will briefly go over the registration process. So we have a presentation over here. And so the first thing that you need to do is go directly to the website over here, teamdimitri.ca. Once you get to the website, you're going to have to donate directly to the party / campaign. Next slide. So as you can see over here, this is where the page will take you. These are the donation page. You can choose what type of membership that you want. It can be a 1-year membership or a 3-year membership. And the minimum that you can contribute is $10. And of course, that is mostly tax deductible. So you will be spending ultimately $2 or $2.5. So you fill in your billing information and you confirm. Then we go to the next slide.
There's no next slide, right? So once you become a member of the Green Party before September 3rd, you then vote for Dimitri, and then we win.
Perfect. And well, I assume there would have been a next slide, because the next slide would have said you call all your friends and family members and you tell them to join, and you get them to subscribe into the Green Party, and they vote Dimitri. Now, as Dimitri has said, make sure you do so before September 3rd. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to vote in the leadership race. So with that being said, thank you for the slides. You can take them off now. So Dimitri, one of the questions that has come to us is, quote, is there a way we could return to a true 2-state solution, or would you be in favor of a 1-state solution or something else entirely? And we don't have much time, so unfortunately, we're going to have to plow through these questions.
Well, I think really that's a question. I don't think it's for me to say, you know, whether the 2-state solution or the 1-state solution is best for the people of Palestine and for citizens of Israel. I think they have to decide that by themselves, but we have to put the Palestinian people in a position where they can negotiate as equals with Israel. There is a grotesque imbalance of power between the two sides, and the state of Israel is ruthlessly exploiting that power imbalance to basically avoid any kind of a resolution. So we have, and the way we level the playing field so that they can negotiate as equals is by sanctioning Israel until it gives the Palestinian people a real voice in their own destiny, and then they can have a resolution that makes the most sense. If the Palestinian people and the people of Israel wanted 2 states, then of course, and it was a fair outcome, I would completely support it. I would personally, if it were me, I can't say because I didn't live there, but just as a matter of sort of political orientation, I would prefer to have a single state in which all people are treated equally. That would be my preference. But it may be that, you know, that's not the preference of people who are living in Palestine and Israelis. The key thing is to make sure that there's a fair and equal negotiation going on that leads to a just result for both sides.
Thank you, Dimitri. So the next question is, what are your thoughts about getting trade union affiliation to the Green Party?
I think it's absolutely critical that we bring both unionized and non-unionized workers into the Green Party. You know, we have ceded the role of champion of organized labor to the NDP. And the leadership of the NDP just takes the support of organized labor for granted now. You know, I think it's time for us to have a real champion of workers in Parliament. And so I put forward a workers' rights platform that calls for some things that I don't think any member of Parliament has called for in my lifetime. For example, the right of workers to be represented on the boards of public companies, a 10-to-1 spread between executive compensation and worker compensation, so that no executive is paid more than 10 times what the lowest paid worker is paid. Right now, you have executives making, there are some CEOs in this country who make within an hour what a worker takes an entire year to make. That's obscene. It's absolutely obscene. So we have to put brakes on executive compensation. We have to make sure that the pensions of workers are protected first, that they're prioritized when a corporation fails and it becomes insolvent. I'm advocating for a $20 minimum wage. I don't think the minimum $15 minimum wage in big cities in this country is grossly inadequate. At the same time, I think we should help small businesses to be able to pay that minimum wage, but ultimately we have to have a wage that is enabling people to lead a decent life. These are the types of things I'm advocating for, and as a result, Sid Ryan, the former president of the Ontario Federation of Labor, and you know, an former NDP candidate, somebody who came close to running for the leadership of the NDP, has endorsed my workers' rights platform and has said that he hasn't seen anything like that platform from the federal NDP or any provincial NDP in his lifetime. So that's how bold this platform is in support of workers. I think workers should become our allies in the struggle for environmental justice. They above all else, you know, want to be invested in that because they will be affected the most by a climate catastrophe.
Okay, very well said, Dimitri. The next question is, what would you say to those who want to vote Green, but for fear of conservatives coming back, they would go and vote for the Liberals as the lesser evil?
Well, I think, let's be clear, we're not in a general election right now. But we're asking, what I'm asking progressives around this country to do, whether they're from the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, the workers' movement, union, you know, organized labor, is to help ensure that the next leader of the Green Party of Canada is going to be a committed advocate for justice, social justice, equality, democracy, and will take on the corporate sector. That's what I think the party needs. That's what I think the country needs. So we're not at that stage yet where you have to decide, what am I going to do about the possibility of the Conservatives coming to power? Because we're not in an election right now. So it's very clear. We're just, the choice you are being confronted by is, what kind of a leader do you want the Green Party of Canada to have? Now, if you end up wanting to continue to support the party after this contest, and I hope that every single person who joins the party will want to remain committed to the Green Party of Canada, and you come to that moment in time where you have to decide, well, am I going to allow the Conservatives to come back into power? I would say to you, I think you need to engage in an honest assessment of the differences between the Liberals and the Conservatives. How different are they really? You know, look at what Justin Trudeau has done. Is his foreign policy any better than the Conservative foreign policy? I don't see it. I think his policy, in fact, when it comes to Palestine, Justin Trudeau's government has voted against UN resolutions condemning Israel even more than Stephen Harper did. And his government brags about this. You know, is his government any less deferential to the United States in foreign policy? And look what it's doing in Venezuela. Look at its attitude towards Iran. Is it really a better government than the Conservative government? I think the differences between the Liberals and the Conservatives today are minuscule, and that they agree on 90% of things. And ultimately, if you vote Liberal, you're just voting for conservative light. That's all. If you really want to change the direction of this country, we need to break out of this pattern of lesser evilism and finally vote with our conscience. So if you decide you want to join the party and an election comes around, that's what I would urge you to do. Vote your conscience. That's the only way forward.
Mm-hmm. Very well. So the next one, and folks, we might have to only do a couple more questions since we're running out of time, and we've had a lot of questions as it is. Sorry, we couldn't ask all of them. So the next one is, there are a lot of similarities between the Green Party and the NDP, except when it comes to labor union support. What will you do to attract union forces to become the new dominant party for unions?
I love that question, but I think I've already answered it. So I'm just going to be brief. Again, none of this is in the NDP platform. An absolute limit on executive compensation, no more than 10-to-1 spread. A legal requirement that the boards, that workers be represented on the boards of public corporations. Putting worker pensions first in insolvencies, corporate insolvencies. A $20 minimum wage. This is not an NDP platform plank. Also I'm calling for, an end to billionaire status. I don't think we should have billionaires in this country. I don't understand why we allow people to accumulate that kind of wealth when we have tens of thousands of people living in the streets and millions of people living in poverty. I think we should put a cap on wealth and say, we're not going to allow people to accumulate billions of dollars. And we should redistribute that money to the people who need it the most. I want an economy whose success is measured by how we take care of the most vulnerable Canadians. That's how you measure the success of an economy, not by how much wealth is being aggregated in the hands of the ultra wealthy. So that to me is the way we're going to get workers to come into this party. And it's already begun. Many people have told me that for the first time, they're lifelong NDPers, they're union members, they've always voted NDP, and they're coming to the Green Party because they finally feel that somebody is speaking to their hearts and mind.
Thank you. So Dimitri, if you're willing, and if you do have the time, I know you're very busy with your campaign, we could extend it to however long you wish, or we could have one more question and we stop right there.
I can take 3 more questions, I think, maybe a little more, but sure.
Okay, fair enough. So the next question is, if elected leader of the Green Party, are there any Green Party policies that you are willing or wanting to revisit? Which ones and why or why not?
It's hard for me to find. There's a lot of policies within the Green Party policy book. So let me just say that from the outset. And I don't necessarily know every single one of the policies, but off the top of my head, I can't think of a policy that I disagree with. What I think is that there are a lot of policies that are missing. I think we need to add a lot of important policies. So I've mentioned a number of them, like a number of the things that I talked about with respect to workers' rights and taxing the wealthy. That's not in the policy book. I also want this party to become a vigorous advocate for demilitarization. I haven't mentioned that yet. So we did not in the last election call for a dramatic reduction in military spending. I'm calling for a 50% reduction in military spending and the reallocation of that money to dealing with the climate emergency and other socially important objectives. I'm calling for Canada to get out of NATO. We didn't do that in the last election. I can't for the life of me understand why we think we should be part of that military alliance, which has destroyed Libya. It was involved in the occupation of Afghanistan, which has left that country in ruins. It was involved in the bombardment of Syria. It killed hundreds of innocent civilians in Yugoslavia to support a Kosovo Liberation Army that is now led by a war criminal. The president of Kosovo is accused of war crimes, and this is the person that we helped to put into power by bombarding Yugoslavia. This is what NATO did. NATO is stationing troops on the Russian border, causing incredible instability with a state that is armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. And above all of that, NATO is pressuring us constantly to spend 2% of our GDP on the military when we are confronted by an existential climate threat that is far worse than any military threat that we confront. So we as a party, I want us to become leaders in a demilitarization movement, in a peace movement, and in a get out of NATO movement. Mo, I can't hear you.
Sorry, for some reason I was on mute.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure you are aware of this. currently Bill 168 is in the Ontario legislature. It's being reviewed by the Standing Committee on Justice Policy, and it may proceed towards a third reading. Would you be able to give us your thoughts on the particular bill and what is problematic with it? The bill in question, just as a side note, is the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that would be adopted by the provincial government.
I will give you my view on that, but before I do that, you know, the federal government may be constrained in what it can do about that bill because it is before the provincial legislature and not before Parliament. But maybe it may be constrained. But my view, you know, about the IHR definition of anti-Semitism is very clear, and it's essentially the view that Independent Jewish Voices has been putting forward for years, and with great eloquence and success. You know, the core definition of anti-Semitism within the IHR definition of anti-Semitism, I don't believe to be problematic. What is problematic is the examples of anti-Semitism, and particularly which, you know, appear in the latter part of the definition, and particularly this notion that if you call for Israel to be held accountable for its human rights violations, that that's somehow possibly anti-Semitic, you know, that you're holding Israel to a standard to which other states are not being set. This is in fact a false characterization of what Palestinian solidarity activists are saying. They're not saying that Israel should be held to a different standard. They're saying Israel should be held to the same standard. You know, for example, the same standard as we hold Russia to. I mentioned the case of Crimea. You know, why are we imposing sanctions on Russia about Crimea and we're not imposing sanctions on the state of Israel for illegally annexing Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, and putting hundreds of thousands of settlers on occupied territory? So this IHRA definition basically twists the facts around and makes it seem as though people who simply want Israel to be held to the same standard are somehow holding Israel to a higher standard and are therefore anti-Semitic. So I think that that definition is very problematic. If I were the prime minister and it actually passed into law provincially, I would look at ways in which to challenge the law constitutionally, because I think that it is a serious impingement on the free speech rights of Palestinian solidarity activists. And if there was a law like that passed, whether provincially or by the federal government, well, it wouldn't happen if I were the prime minister federally. If it happened provincially, I would look for ways to challenge the law constitutionally under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dimitri. And the very last question we have is, Canadian foreign policy calls for a two-state solution. It also recognizes the Palestinian right of self-determination. 138 out of 193 countries recognize Palestine as a state. Canada, until this very day, refuses to recognize Palestine as a state, although they recognize Israel, even from the onset of the occupation of Palestine. What is your position in that regard?
My position is the formal position of the Green Party. The resolution I mentioned, I didn't say this earlier, but the resolution that we succeeded in getting passed with enormous support calls for Canada to recognize Palestine as a state. So that is the official position of the Green Party, and that is my position, no question. And, you know, that's what I would advocate for if I were the leader of the Green Party.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you all, folks. Thank you so much, Dimitri. I just want to quickly remind everyone to please register for Green Party membership before September 3rd. Get your friends, your family to register as well. Be sure to vote for Dimitri Lascaris. You can't miss his name. It's right there. Dimitri will continue to support you. The Palestine Solidarity Movement stands behind you. Thank you a lot, my friend.
Thank you very much, everybody. Pleasure talking to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
And now I will hand it over to Musa to mention a few names of our co-sponsors and endorsers.
Thank you, Mo. I need actually your help with this, Mo. I need you, if you can start with the names of the student organizations in GTA, Muhammad. You are on mute, Muhammad.
Someone keeps putting me on mute as a joke.
That's Ala, definitely.
Thank you, Ala. So the organizations that have endorsed this event from the GTA, the student organizations, are Palestine Solidarity Collective at York University, and the Campuses for Palestine Coalition. In Montreal, we have Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights at McGill University. We have the Palestinian Student Association at the University of Ottawa. And am I missing anyone else, Musa?
The students, yes. We have also the Palestinian Student Association of Carleton University.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we have someone, we have Safe here with us. From the other organizations, the community organizations, we have the Atlantic Canada Palestinian Society. We have the Arab Society of London. We have the Palestinian Association of London, Ontario. We have Palestinian Association of Hamilton. We have Wa'il Ghanem with us. The Palestine House, we have Hammam Farah with us. And I believe Hammam also from the Students Against Israeli Apartheid of York University. We have Jamal Khalid from the APA, the Association, the Arab Palestinian Association of Mississauga, Palestine House of Toronto. We have Palestinian Association of Brantford. I believe Nasser Hamad is with us, if I'm not mistaken.
We have the CPFQ.
CPFQ of Montreal, the Canadian Palestinian Foundation of Quebec. Am I missing anyone from Toronto ANO? We have myself and others. We have the Association of Palestinian Arab Canadians of Capital Region in Ottawa. Hamad, you wanted to say someone in Toronto still?
Yeah, we have also Actions for Palestine based in Toronto, and we have the Toronto BDS network.
True. And we have also Ramzi Zaid from the Palestinian Association of Winnipeg, Dr. Yusuf Barakat from Canadian Arab Forum of British Columbia. We have the Canada Palestine Association of Vancouver, Muhammad, as well, right?
Yes, we do.
Yes. And we have the Palestinian Association of Edmonton as well. Hopefully I'm not missing anyone else. Muhammad, we have someone raising his hand. I don't know if you can, Henry.
Yeah, I can see that. Just wanted to quickly remind folks that there is a Google form on the chat. Please fill out the Google form to stay updated regarding the Palestinian community support for Dimitri Lascaris' campaign. Don't forget to fill it out if you could, please. Yeah, and if anyone would like to be in touch with me in any regard, I'm seeing some private messages. You could add me on Facebook and send me a request over there. Musa, is there anything else?
Finally, actually, we have to thank also Dr. Muhammad Abu Awad from Toronto. He's a part of each and every organization. Basically, he works everywhere, and he's one of the founders of the CPPF as well. Thank you, Muhammad, for helping us arrange such a meeting. I'm done, Muhammad. It's your final remarks. Go on.
Okay. Thank you so much, folks, for the last time. This was a great event. It was a pleasure talking to Dimitri. It was a pleasure to have so many familiar faces and so many new faces here virtually. we do look forward to the next event. Please stay in touch and in tune with all the organizations that were mentioned today. Be sure to support and vote for Dimitri. And as always, please stay in good health and stay safe. And
Thank you,
have a good
everyone.
night.